You ever read something, your life will never be the same? Exactly. Another day, another list of all-time favorites. So one of my favorite bands, Wallows, in their song 1980s horror film says, "Why are girls in songs always 17?" And that's how I feel today because I have 17 all-time favorites to share with you guys. These are the books over the course of my life that have changed my life, for lack of a better term, a more unique term. And so I thought it would be fun to organize them by time in my life that I read them. So the oldest all-time favorite to the most recent. As you can imagine, I'm very picky because I only have 17 all-time favorites. And I don't know how many books I've read in my life, but I think I'm very stingy compared to a lot of people I know and have talked to about this. But yes, so these all sit at the top of my bookshelf because I want my favorites at the top, obviously. And so I had a couple little trinkets on the shelf that I just wanted to share. Two of them go with one of the books, so I'll wait till we get there. But then the other one is just a note card with a verse that my dad wrote for me, and it is Psalm 62:2. "Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will never be shaken." And I just love that. And it's a great verse, so I wanted it by some of my favorite stories. And yeah, a lot of these have themes that I very much believe in as a worldview, but they also just have fantastic characters. And how do I describe what an all-time favorite is to me? I think the biggest way I tell an all-time favorite is something that I would easily reread and something that I would genuinely recommend to everyone regardless of their reading taste, because to me, the books that I classify as all-time favorites are not just... there's maybe one exception in here, but most of them, 16 of them, are not really subjective reasoning in terms of like being super related to just me, but most of them just have themes about humanity that I really believe in, whether it's redemption, whether it is reconciliation. There's a lot of stuff here conceptually and thematically that I just really believe are the best parts of humanity. And I appreciate that they meditate on those things. So let's jump in and start with all of the all-time favorites I read throughout grade school. So we have grade school, we have college, and then we have adulthood. And the books that have the biggest stack is actually college. Again, I'm very, very particular. Okay, so I think everyone and their mom could probably guess what the first one is. So let's just get it out of the way, right? Harry Potter. And so there's a couple series on here, so obviously I've just picked one of the books to represent the whole series. Most of them are standalones, though. Harry Potter, for me, for a billion other people, is just a literary touchstone, and a fantastical touchstone of just a love for how much of, in my opinion, how much of our world can be better understood through something that's not our world. And I think that tends to be the kind of fantasy that I go for. I have said this in my other reading videos, but I'm really not an escapist reader. I'm someone who appreciates a story that makes me want to do more in my own life or do more for the people around me. And I think Harry Potter is the perfect kind of fantasy that really grips me because it's not just about an imaginary world, but it has a lot to say about the real world that inspires me in terms of friendship, in terms of love, in terms of sacrifice, in terms of working towards the greater good. which I realize some people might find ironic now with the author, but by and large, it has a lot of themes that I really believe in, and unforgettable characters, of course. I think this author's strength to me, because I have read other works by this author, I think the most distinctive part of this author's writing is obviously the characters, because all of the characters I've ever seen them write, they've all been very distinctive in a way that is so hard to forget. And I find that is not a strength many other writers I've read have. Not that they don't have good characters, but even like looking at all my other favorite books, this one is probably the one with the most distinctive characters. Or rather, regardless of the volume of characters, they're all distinctive. I find that very impressive, because I think a lot of authors put all of their character development into like a couple characters and then maybe other ones fall flat. And so this is a great, huge volume of characters who I think are all done really well. And that's a big reason I think this series has stood the test of time for me. I will say though, as I've gotten older, I still love the series, but it definitely is not as significant as it was for me throughout childhood and even throughout college. I would more so say it represents my childhood than my adulthood, I guess. But there's still obviously very relevant like themes of grief and such in this series that still do carry over. I think some of the other books to me are just a little more accurate, maybe. And maybe part of that is just because this is so based in the education system, which is more of a childhood thing. So anyway, the next one, which I'm currently rereading, is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, which a lot of you may have also had to read in school. I had to read this in 7th grade, and it enthralled me. I thought the characters were also really well done, and this, if you don't know, is about Pony Boy, and it takes place in the 50s, in more of that, what do you call it, the era of gangs, like similar to Grease. I feel like Grease is a terrible comparison. But anyway, it's about these boys and it's coming of age. It's also dealing with some heavier topics, and it deals with ostracization very well, as you can imagine by the title. And I think one of my favorite components is the sibling dynamics. I love a good sibling dynamic, and I still believe, at least in my reading repertoire, they're not discussed enough. And so anytime I find a good sibling dynamic, I almost always fall in love with it. I actually don't know if I've ever read a sibling dynamic I didn't like. But this has a lot to do with friends, as much as it has to do about brotherhood, as much as it has to do with identity and belonging. And so I feel like there's not much else you need to know if you haven't read it. I think it's worth reading, especially if you're a younger person. The next one, obviously this is the most recent release, the most recent book out of all of these that has been published. However, hot take, I think this is the best book in the series, and I'm gonna come in boldly swinging with it. Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. The whole entire Hunger Games series was something I read in high school along with like every other person. And at the time, I thought it was really unique, and I loved Jennifer Lawrence and I loved Josh Hutcherson and I loved the movies, but it truly didn't hit me until rereading it this past year, and then rereading Snow's book, and then reading this book, how valuable they all are. in terms of aging well, I think this series ages a lot more poignantly than Harry Potter. Harry Potter has just very common themes that people resonate with in their journey through life, period. But the Hunger Games, it ages better and better because of how it socially, technologically, culturally, and politically analyzes the world. And because of that, there's a lot more layering that to me reminds me not just of US culture, which a lot of people like to harp on, but it reminds me of what's going on in the Middle East, and it reminds me of most countries, and even just how countries do or don't relate to each other. I think there's so many layers of ways that you can apply this messaging, and obviously anywhere there's violence, which is anywhere in the world, there's a lot being said here that can apply to that. And so I think this is easily like the series, the most hyped books in the past 20 years that deserves to be a classic, in my opinion, because you can learn so much about systems that might be new to you when you're a teen and a young adult, but then you can also continue to apply so much of this as an adult in a new way because your brain couldn't fully grasp the layers when you were a teen or a young adult. This is definitely a series and a book that I believe you should read multiple times in different stages of your life, and I even feel like I would get so much more out of it if I read it in my 30s, etc. Like at least once a decade. I think there's just so much here that is timeless and so important. And I said this a bit in my previous vlog, but when I briefly mentioned this, I just think Suzanne does a great job at unnumbing people to the terrors of the world, the violence of the world, in a way that the news and social media constantly numbs us to. She just has this magic about her writing that, in my opinion, just dethaws us from the oversaturation we receive from these other things. So I think it's fantastic. This is definitely the book that is in the worst condition, which is hilarious because I have not read from this copy. My cat got to it and chewed the corner, and it also got waterlogged. So here we are. This was a huge turning point book for me in high school, probably out of all of these, like the turning point in terms of reading. And I got to read it in my father's classroom because I had my father as a teacher, believe it or not. And that is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, which I still cannot believe that Emma and Carolyn have not read. Out of all of the Dickens books they have read, I'm like, what are you doing? So if you know Emma and Carolyn, tell them they need to read this. This is the one I definitely want to reread the most because I have only read it in high school and I surely did not catch all of the layers. If I didn't catch all the layers in a simpler writing style, there's no way I caught all of Dickens' layers in here. This was, up until this point, the hardest book I had ever read. And because of that, it was a very memorable reading experience. I don't feel like I can too in-depth tell you what it's about just because it's been so long. But the theme of basically all these books is it has to do with humanity. Like, it's very much large scale thematically. And yeah, Dickens has very dense writing. I feel like he's one of those writers you think of as being one of the most intimidating if you want to pick up classics. And so it was such a victory for me to fight my way through this book because it was so much harder than anything I'd read before. just to get to the end and be using up like half a box of tissues because of how emotional the ending of the story was, but also how rewarding it felt that just because it was hard, I didn't give up on it. And that is absolutely like the thing I'd probably encourage people if you want to try to get into more dense literature, is like, it's gonna be a challenge, but don't give up on yourself. You can definitely slug it out. You can get through it. It doesn't mean, you know, you'll get everything right away. It might take a few books to really start like getting into the different pacing of it or whatnot, but it's a very rewarding experience to teach yourself that you can do hard things. That's basically what this book means for me, but the story itself was very impactful, and it is very much also like a much larger political scale story. And then this is maybe the most popularly read classic on my list. This was the last one I read in high school, and that is The Little Prince. This is a beautiful edition. This is the deluxe 70th anniversary edition. And so you have the book in here. All its beautiful illustrations. I found this one because of my dad. This is one of his favorites. And then the two little trinkets from my bookshelf are these two pins, the rose and the Little Prince. They never focus, it's fine. And then I have used this multiple times now. The deluxe edition also comes with the audiobook. So you have this cute little artwork with the two CDs in here. Super cute. This is another one where I'm like, how do I explain it? Because I feel like people either already know it or they don't, but it's so short that I don't want to say much. This is about a man who crash lands his plane on a planet and runs into the Little Prince. And Little Prince tells him about his life, basically. And there's a lot of morals here. And I think maybe my favorite part of the book is the way it discusses love. I don't generally often don't like romance books, but I do consider myself a romantic. I like reading about romance, but that's not the same thing to me as reading romance books, because romance books are usually just like about physicality. Like what I like is like the emotions behind romance, like finding a way to describe something so lofty in a new way. Like I love that pursuit in romantic literature. It's very satisfying because it is such a intangible thing, and so when people find new words for romance, I just think it's the coolest thing ever. So this is one example of that, and I really like his very simple, straightforward writing. It makes it powerful in a different way to me. So now I'm gonna move on to the largest stack, which is all the books I read throughout my years in college. I'm actually surprised this is the largest stack because I feel like college is when I read the most because of my English studies, and I feel like I was oversaturated in reading. So I'm actually very impressed that I read this many all-time favorites in college. The first one is the longest book on this list, and that is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. A lot of you might know the movie and or the stage production. Having read this whole book, I read half of it in high school for AP English, and then I finished it after my first year of college because obviously college started, and this is like the last thing in the world I had time to read. Victor Hugo is even denser than Charles Dickens. He is like the encapsulation of someone who's so detailed, you're like, this is kind of painful, but at the same time, like, I love it though. I don't know. It's very impressive to me that someone or a group of people took this massive thing, and they were like, I can make a musical out of that. What do you mean? How? That astounds me, especially now that I've read the whole thing. I'm like, how in the world? I don't know. Because obviously, it's an incredibly, incredibly bare bones version of this, and yet it still is comprehensive. And I don't get it. Like, what sorcery is this? Praise Jesus, he gave us that. Because I don't get it. Whose brain works like that? That's crazy to me. This has a really nice floppy texture, I have to say. I have not read this particular copy, but I saw it and it was used and it was super cheap, and I was like, I have to get my own copy because I don't have it. So this follows Jean Valjean, who is an ex-convict. We see him released from his time, and it has a lot to do with redemption. So we mainly follow his arc and how it intersects with the other characters in the book. There are themes of faith, there are themes of hope, and then of course like the French Revolution and the war is going on as well, and so it's very, again, I feel like there's a theme here. A lot of these have like political overtones toward like revolution and change, and overthrowing corrupt systems, but also just like meditating on the commonalities within humanity rather than divisions, because we meditate on divisions way too much, in my opinion, when we actually have so much in common. And yeah, this book also has a lot to do with mental health in ways you might not expect. And I mean, it really is pretty much, again, comprehensive of humanity, because that's the type of thing I love to read. I don't like to just read about like one person's story, but when it feels like there's a lot of universally applicable things going on, I really appreciate that. And I think that's a big reason why I would generally say I'd recommend these to anyone, is because it covers such a breadth of people's stories and not just one type of person's story, if that makes sense. It smells good too. Okay, so this one is one of a couple that I read in high school, but I didn't decide it was an all-time favorite until I reread it. And part of that is kind of similar to my desire to reread A Tale of Two Cities. I definitely can never intake everything in high school when there was so much literarily I hadn't read yet. And so there was a lot of like muscle of intaking literary devices I didn't have yet at that point. And so these things are more impactful when I had more of those tools solidly in my tool belt, if that makes sense. Not that this one's even that challenging. It's not even a classic, but yes, I'm very grateful to have read this a couple times now. It is my favorite memoir, and it is very popular for good reason, and that is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. All you have to do is read the first sentence, the first paragraph, the first page, and in my opinion, you're hooked. This memoir is about her father, and she grew up in a family that was emotionally volatile, and full of addiction and full of mistreatment, abuse, even just like generational abuse. But despite all of that hardship, I think the coolest part about Jeanette's writing is she somehow manages to show her family story as objectively as possible. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that she has a journalism background. And so it's really impressive because she has her feelings towards her father, and you can kind of tell what her feelings are, but simultaneously she gives enough room for the reader to really interpret and make their own conclusions about her family members as they want to. And I think that shows a lot of probably mental and emotional healing that she had to go through throughout her life to really reckon with a lot of it. But it also just shows a lot of maturity in wanting to not just tell her story, but tell a more universal story, really, which is why I love it. And her writing is fantastic because of the mature outlook through which she writes everything. So I would highly recommend, especially if you are not really familiar with memoirs. This one is another very popular one, and it is so worth the hype. This is my favorite author of all time, and I actually have 2 of his books on my all-time favorite list. But I've loved all of his books that I have read, and this obviously is way more popular than all his other books, which is kind of bittersweet because it absolutely deserves it, but his other books are also so good. And that is The Book Thief. I don't know how I didn't read it sooner in my life. I didn't read it until college, but I proceeded to make everyone in my family also read it because of how much I love it. And that's actually very rare because everyone in my family has very different reading tastes. But this was the book I read and I was like, I think everyone's gonna love this. So this takes place during Nazi Germany in 1939, and it's narrated by death. So, I mean, you're just set up to know that you're gonna get your heart wrenched out. And it's a beautiful story of loyalty. It's a beautiful story of truth and honesty. And as you can tell, I just love a good theme because I tend to think of how much I love something through that lens rather than the actual plot. Liesel is so lovely, and Rudy is so lovely, and all the characters are so easy to fall in love with. And this is, of course, a book that also deals in a love of books too, so there's that cool layer as well. But this man is my absolute favorite. He is my blueprint. He has simple yet eloquent writing, but the coolest part of his writing is the best way I can describe it is he finds ways to use verbs and adjectives like I've never seen anyone else use them. Like he'll characterize something that's not normally characterized, or personify something through a verb that isn't normally. It's like he combines his huge imagination with his knowledge of words and somehow does something with his words that I never see other writers do, and it just floored me, and I've felt that way in his other books as well. I just find his writing so piercing. And yes, what I also love about his writing is all of his stories are pretty different. The thing that threads them all is his beautiful writing, but none of his books are anywhere near the same thing. This is the only one that's historical fiction. I love me some Marcus Zusak. This one I also read in a memoir class, so we reread The Glass Castle, which is when I put it on my all-time favorites. And then we also read this one, which I've only read the one time, but I loved it. And that is The Mountain and the Fathers by Joe Wilkins. This one is about the Big Dry, which is a region in Montana, and it's Joe's story growing up and his search for fatherhood. He didn't really have a solid father figure growing up, so it's kind of the various father figures he had throughout his life and examining what it means to be a father, and what it means to be a good father. And I just really enjoyed that meditation, and I think his writing is very descriptive with the lush nature of this part of the country that I've never been to, and I just thought it was a cool homage to all these various people throughout his life as well. while simultaneously being a deeper study. And I think that's why I like both of these memoirs, because it's just as much of a story of real people and an honor to those people, while also being a survey on various topics that makes it more universal and desirable to be read from someone who doesn't know this person and would never know this person. There's still merit in it being published because of what it studies that goes beyond his life. This is another real person who many more people will know compared to Joe Wilkins, and that is Leslie Odom Jr., who was in the Hamilton original cast as Aaron Burr. And this is his book, Failing Up: How to Take Risks, Aim Higher, and Never Stop Learning. This one, a little more selfishly, is because he has a lot in common with me in his creative journey, and I appreciated how honest he was with how his parents were very hesitant for him to do stuff in the arts and all of the leaps of faith he had to take to pursue the arts and creativity and less conventionality. And that is always a narrative that I very much resonate with, because even though convention is comfortable, it's never been something that makes me happy. And so just getting to hear someone else's story who I believe has gone on to be successful creatively was very inspiring, and it was very timely. I read it preceding my final year in school, and it was a very scary time for me because I had zero idea what I was going to do. I mean, still don't really know, but it was very encouraging to see his stumble through a similar journey to come out on the other side feeling really proud and grateful for where he was at. And it obviously was not just a linear journey, which I think, especially when you're consistently going through school and used to persistent change, it can be easy to think everything's just going to keep being linear, but that's almost never the case. And so it was also encouraging to see that even though his journey wasn't linear, it was still successful. And whether it's linear or not does not have to mean that makes or breaks your creative journey. So it's very encouraging. And if you are also creative in any capacity, I would highly recommend this one. This is the one graphic novel, and it's just so sweet. That is Everyone's Alien When You're Alien Too by Jomny Sun. I think you shouldn't know anything. You should just read it. You read it in one sitting because it's so quick and it's so fast. This is obviously the most wholesome book on my list. And it's just so cute. And there's so many animals. There's a little map in here. He just randomly adds bees to a bunch of words. This is just like one of those reminders when maybe you've gotten too cynical or you're depressed. It's a great reminder of all of the simple joys and beauties in the world that we can sometimes grow numb to or forget are a blessing. So this is just like a ray of sunshine and vitamin D whenever you might need it. So pick it up when you need it. This is the second Marcus Zuzak book that I also read in my college years, and this is one I do want to reread soon as well, and that is I Am the Messenger. This is a contemporary. The protagonist is Ed Kennedy. He's a 19-year-old cab driver, okay? I forget where exactly it takes place, but basically he receives this playing card and it has directions on it, and he follows the directions and strange things begin happening. And so it's kind of this, like, I don't even have anything good to compare it to, but it's this unraveling of like what's going on, and it ends up being very beautiful, very heartwarming, and personally, I didn't see any of it coming, and that also really impressed me. So if you want a mystery that's not like a murder mystery, but just like I don't quite know where this book's gonna take me, but I'm intrigued, this is a really good one for that. And this is like probably out of these, because I enjoy writing contemporary, this is probably like the cream of the crop for me in terms of writing inspiration, because I love the characters, I love the friends' relationships and dynamics. He also loves animals, and he has this dog named the Doorman in this book, and I just love a good animal moment, a significant animal in a story, so that was fun too. And I think it just has a little bit of everything that is very heartwarming to me. Friendship, bravery, love. I feel like I'm quoting Harry Potter basically. But yeah, this one from what I remember is just very heartwarming, and I would highly recommend. And then the final one from my college days, this is the one that is definitely the most subjective. Not everyone will love this. This book / series is definitely more just an homage to myself, selfishly, but I'm still gonna mention it because I do genuinely love it, and that is To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. This is like the story that I read, and I felt like I was reading about myself in high school, and it just felt like a love letter to my teenage self, my boy-obsessed teenage self who loved One Direction and 5 Seconds of Summer and had like 12 crushes on people all the time. The other cool thing I remember enjoying about this series is there's little like multimedia stuff at the back of each book. So like one of them has recipes at the end, one of them has a playlist of songs. And so you can enjoy the story and then like take part in the story in a way after you've read it, or even during you reading it if you want. And it's about this girl, Laura Jean, who has written a love letter over the years to the different crushes she's had, and the letters get sent out against her will to the boys, and the unraveling of that process. And it has a lot to do with family. I think better than the movies, although I did still really love the movies, I will say, and that's actually why I picked up the books, as I watched the first one and I really enjoyed it. But what I really like about the books especially is they have just as much to do with family as they do with the boys and all of that plot line. And the movies, as you can imagine, are a lot more just romance focused. And so I really appreciate how prevalent the sister dynamic is in the books and the dad dynamic in the books, and how we see those relationships grow and flourish throughout each book, as well as unraveling what's happening to Laura Jean with these guys as well. So I appreciate a good balanced story that has just as much to do with the non-romantic relationships as the romantic relationships. And last but not least, I'm going to talk about the 4 books I've loved from adulthood more than any other books. So much so that I had to put them on my all-time favorites list. The first one is the second book that I read in high school, but that I didn't add until I reread it in adulthood. And that is one of my other favorite authors, J.D. Salinger, but it's not what you think. It's Franny and Zooey. Oh, my goodness. So this is 2 little novellas, Franny and Zooey. Imagine that. And they are siblings. I actually love how much sibling representation my all-time favorite list has. That makes me very happy. So here's what you might not know, because most people only know Catcher in the Rye. All of J.D. Salinger's novellas, I've read all of them now, makes me sad. I have 0 works by him I have not read. I've even read his insanely obscure writings for newspapers. That's how much I love him. But all of his works are interconnected in this family that Franny and Zooey are in. They are called the Glass family. And so the theory is Catcher in the Rye was written by one of the Glass siblings. So this is an entirely fictional family. And the theory / lore is that Buddy Glass wrote Catcher in the Rye. So no one in the story itself, like Holden, is related to the family, but the author is supposedly Buddy rather than J.D. Salinger, even though it obviously is J.D. Salinger because he's the real person. But that is the lore within one of the other novellas. I forget which one, but it definitely mentions that. So this is one of those, it's also hard to explain because it's also pretty short, pretty small. But there's some really good philosophical meditations in here. So some of you might love that, some of you might hate that. You'll be like, nothing happened. So if you don't like things without plot, you're not gonna like this. But if you like things that are very introspective and philosophical, but they're fiction rather than like straight philosophy, you're gonna love this. Franny is a little novella about Franny coming home from college and working through her relational dynamics and really coming into herself and discovering things about herself. And then Zooey is about Zooey just like chilling at home and where he's at in contrast to where Franny's at, because kind of overlaps a little bit timeline wise. And he's the one mainly doing the philosophical musings. And all of these novellas are very fun to kind of like put together. I don't really know how exactly I'd recommend you read them, but I think you can understand more about these if you read all of his novellas, because they all have to do with various siblings in different ways. You can definitely just read these in and of themselves, but it to me is more fun to have the full context of their entire family by reading all of them. But these two are my favorite. Also, shout out to my last reading vlog. It mentions Epictetus. So there you go. That's how philosophical it is. In contrast, this is like the perfect representation of I can love something and it has no plot. So plot does not make or break a book by any means. This is the second largest book on the list after Les Mis. It's so good. I read this in 2022. And that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I think you can tell I have a lot of spiritual themes in the books that I love, because that's who I am. I can't help it. It just seeps through. But this is a fantastic family saga. It goes through multiple generations of this family and a lot of their like sin layers, as you can imagine, because we're referencing Eden. There's some Cain and Abel symbolism in here as well. And smells odd. This is a beautiful copy. I have not read out of this copy. I read it from the library. And again, I would love to reread all of these because most of them I bought after knowing they were an all-time favorite, so didn't get to tab them or anything. This also is very much like good versus evil. If you want a more classical version of some of those Harry Potter themes, I would say pick this one up because it's also, you know, in the same longer book vibes. His writing is so easy to get into. I know some people don't love, like, Of Mice and Men, some of the more required readings, but I've seen a lot of people find they do love this one. So even if you haven't loved Steinbeck's writing before, I would say this book could change your mind because his writing is very immersive right away. It's very colorful, literally. There's a lot of like texture, there's a lot of like sensory imagery going on, so you feel immersed in the world very quickly. And the characters are very animated, they're also very memorable. I guess his writing strengths are actually very similar to Rowling's, now that I think about it. So if you like long sagas about characters and themes that run throughout generations, and settings that you can really be immersed into, I would definitely recommend this book. And also just like moral victory over evil. Also, I will say along with that, this has the creepiest character I've ever read in my life. So maybe that'll be intriguing enough to pick it up. So this one I did add to my all-time favorites, but I feel like for me it was kind of cheating because it's already my all-time favorite movie. So number one, I knew I wanted to read it. Number two, I already knew it was going to be an all-time favorite. So not quite the same, but that is Harold and Maude by Colin Higgins. A little banjo, so cute. So this is mostly the exact same as the movie, but it did technically originate before the movie, so there are just a couple little scenes that are in here that are not in the movie. Harold and Maude is a cult classic. Harold and Maude is definitely something that I love so deeply, but I know for a fact not everyone will like it. In fact, some people will think it's disturbing or be grossed out by it. So you do you. I don't expect everyone to like this one. I love it. I first watched it in college, alone in my dorm room, because both of my parents had been saying for like years that I would love it. And so one like Friday night, I got it out of the library, I sat down in my dorm room by myself, and I was laughing my butt off for 1.5 hours. I had never laughed that much, that openly, while watching a movie before. And within like 10 minutes, I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna love this. So we follow Harold Chasen, who is this 20-year-old man who is constantly faking his death for his mother specifically, who is completely unfazed, and that's part of the humor. So there's a lot of dark humor. There's also a lot of deadpan humor, and those are my two favorite humors, so it really gets me. And then eventually we run into Maude, who is an 80-year-old woman, and they meet because they both go to funerals for fun. I'm not gonna say much else, but if you like really quirky things, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, but I think this has really good truths about life. It just does it in a very quirky way, which to me, I deeply resonate with. With other people, they might think the way the story is told is weird. So it's hard. This is probably the hardest one to explain, like who would love this. And that's part of the reason it is a cult classic. I don't know. You have to like a bit of absurdity. You have to like suspending your disbelief. If you're gonna take things super literally, I'm just gonna tell you now, you're not gonna like it. It's basically, this is for people who don't take themselves too seriously. If you are still in a spot in your life where you have unhealed things, there's some things you still take seriously, you're not gonna like it. But if you're at a point in your life where you're like, I can easily just like not take anything seriously, you'll like it. I hope that makes sense. I think that's a good way to describe who will or won't like it, but not 100% guarantee. I cannot be responsible if you Hate it. And then the final one is the one poetry collection on this list. This is the most recent all-time favorite I have read, and I want to say it was last year, but it might have been 2023. So I would like to read an all-time favorite soon because it's been way too long. And that is Rilke's Book of Hours, Love Poems to God. This is my favorite poet who I found through Emmy Reads, and I just tabbed all of my favorite poems. There's so many good ones in here. My favorite thing about this collection is how well it depicts God's vastness in a way that we will never fully understand. I really felt God's mystery and God's awesomeness in this text because it's so easy to, in our human selfishness and rationality, it's easy to think we generally mostly understand God. And there's so much about who he is that we don't know. And I think this was just a humbling reminder of that. Here's an example of what I mean. This is in the Book of Monastic Life, which is the first book, and it is the fourth poem. We must not portray you in king's robes, you drifting mist that brought forth the morning. Once again, from the old paint boxes, we take the same gold for scepter and crown that has disguised you through the ages. Piously, we produce our images of you till they stand around you like 1,000 walls. And when our hearts would simply open, our fervent hands hide you. I love that. You drifting mist. Like, that's such a good reminder of his unknowability. So that is what I loved about this collection. It was a beautiful spiritual moment that I hadn't had in a while, because I tend to be a very analytical person, even with scripture, and so this humbled me a lot, and I really needed that, and that's also why it'll be something I continuously go back to. I'm back with Nugget because I almost totally forgot the thing I'm most jazzed about is the 18th book, and I'm very biased because, number one, it is my most recent all-time favorite. I read it and experienced it last year, and it's also the coolest to me because it's a multimedia experience. So my current favorite all-time favorite of my all-time favorites is Clancy by 21 Pilots, and a lot of people know their hit songs, but what a lot of people don't know is their past 3 albums have been them creating an entire fantasy world, and it's very underappreciated. That is such a cool multimedia feat that they have done. I personally believe Tyler Joseph deserves an award, a literary award. It's so cool to me. And I don't want to give too much away about the storyline because there's a lot of twists and turns and it can be easy to spoil because of that. But basically it centers around this city called Dima, which is in a world called Trench. And Dima is a very lifeless city that very much sucks the life out of people, and Trench is a very wild terrain outside of the city that people are generally not allowed to go to. And the city of Dima is run by bishops, and they are very evil. There's a lot of cool concepts and creatures. So basically my recommendation is, okay, so it's a whole multimedia experience. It's so stinking cool. So I would recommend you start with Clancy, who's the protagonist. You start with his letters. So first you're gonna read a book. Really, it's an epistolary series of letters. I think you can find some of them online, but if you want to get the full reading experience, you're gonna have to buy their most recent album that came with the journals. So this it's really, you know, it's very short, and part of it's photos as well, but I literally annotated it, okay? Sorry, I totally cut my head off, but I literally annotated this because I love it so much. And so there's a ton of letters in here. So first what you're gonna do is you're gonna read all of these, okay? And you have your understanding through letters, okay? Second thing you're gonna do is you're gonna listen to their 3 albums that encompass the storyline. So first you start with the album Trench, and then you listen to the album Scaled and Icy, and then you finish with the album Clancy. So that's step 2. And then step 3 of the experience is now you've like really started to understand the world a lot better because you intook the letters and you intook the music. So the final thing you're going to do is go onto their YouTube, and they have a playlist called The Story, and it is the story through all of their music videos. And it's so cool to like first experience the words. I mean, this obviously isn't what I did because this as a collection was not available until last year, but if I had it my way, I imagine it would be so cool to like first get a word. Well, I can't think of a better word than word. Get a verbal understanding, a literary understanding of what's going on, and then you add to that with a sonic understanding and a lyrical understanding of what's going on, and then you put it all together and you add to it with the visual component. It's fantastic. It's fantastic, and it'll make so much more sense and solidify if there's anything you're confused on once you watch the series of music videos. It is like a movie length, so like treat it like a movie, okay? And then I want you to report back because the ending. So you need to experience this, and then you need to report back because everyone's freaking out about the ending. So that's all I have. So those are my all-time favorites. I hope you enjoyed geeking out over some of your all-time favorites or hearing about some that you might also be interested in picking up. I like to think I have a semi-diverse reading taste in terms of like not just reading one genre. But I think this gives you a good idea of what kind of reader I am, what I'm interested in. I love a good theme. I love a good character. I love ways that I can take art and apply it to real life and use it to inspire me to be a better person and to give back to the rest of humanity. I've talked a lot, and I think that's about all I have for you. I hope you guys read an all-time favorite soon, and I hope I do too. And I will talk to you later. Bye.